Thank you again for joining us today and tuning in to our coffee break on the conservation work that we are doing in Sonora, Mexico. If you haven't already, be sure to grab a drink and settle in. We have an engaging presentation on our program work plan for this morning. We can't wait to dive in. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping items to note. First, we really want to thank our donors, volunteers, and everyone who's tuned into this presentation for your continued support of our work that we do in the US and in Mexico. Without you, none of this work in the Sky Island region would be possible. So we really appreciate and value you. Regarding today's event, we have a lot of content to cover and may run a little long depending on the question and answer session at the end here. This is being recorded right now, and we will be placing this up on our website later today. If you go to skyislandalliance.org in the menu, you'll see a link for coffee breaks, and that's where you can find the recording. So if you need to leave a little bit early, you can catch up on anything that you missed. We also, for everybody who registered for this via Zoom, I will be sending out an email later today with the link to the direct coffee break recording. So just so you know. If you have questions during this presentation, please type them into the chat box here in Zoom or in the comments on Facebook if you're watching from our Facebook live stream. We will be monitoring these questions and we'll make sure to leave time for questions for Paulo at the end. Finally, we want to acknowledge the privilege that we have to be here in this region today. The Sky Island Alliance office is in Tucson, and all the work we have done on both sides of the border throughout the Sky Islands is on the land of the Tohono O'odham, the Pascua Yaqui, and other indigenous peoples. With that, let's jump into today's presentation. I am delighted to turn things over to our presenter, Paulo Coati, who is our conservation director here at Sky Island Alliance and is actually currently in Mexico, I believe. Paulo is in charge of our Mexican programs and conservation efforts and has a fantastic overview prepared for us. So with that, Paulo, I will turn things over to you and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And as Anna was saying, I am in Mexico and I'm just out of the city of Querétaro, which is in central Mexico. I had to travel for visa purposes. And it's a bit of a rural area, so you'll have to excuse some barking dogs in the background at times. It's also a bit chilly here, unlike where you are. I'm just above 2,000 meters, so it's really nice. And this area, I'm actually, it's also considered sort of like a Sky Island type of region, just a bit less famous than the one we work in. So let me just start sharing my screen here. Anna, can you see it well?
I can, Paulo.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, okay, I don't wanna. So as Anna was saying, there's a bit of content today, but I'm gonna try to be as brief and as possible so that we can have some time to the end. I'd like to engage in whatever questions and conversations you want to have. And so the way I'm going to go through some of our work in Mexico is I'll talk a little bit about our core programs as an organization in general, right? Especially and based on the US, organization that is based in the US, but that works binationally, and a little bit of the context of conservation in Mexico that is relevant in case that you haven't heard me talk about this before. And then I'll just go over how are we doing things right now in Mexico. And what are we doing? So as you probably know, and let me see this, okay, how can I minimize this? There you go. As you probably know, so our three core programs, the three main lines of work that we do at Sky Island Alliance have to do with conserving wildlife, with protecting water, and with connecting people to the Sky Islands and to nature, right? So this has been a part of the mission and the vision and all the goals of the organization for a long time, and you know, especially we're trying to be more focused on this in the past years. Now, the way we do some of these things in the US has to necessarily be different than the way we do them in Mexico. And I'll talk a little bit about why. This is just a graph and a map of land ownership in the United States. And then on the map is showing you forest ownership. So you can see the different types of ownerships, but there's something that is relevant here is that there's quite a bit of, there's 60% private land and then 3% is tribal land. But then there's quite a chunk of public land in the U.S. But this is not the case in Mexico, and some of this graph is in Spanish, but probably you can read some Spanish. And what this is showing you is just how the structure of land tenure, land ownership in Mexico is very different. And the map to the right is showing you that everything that you see that is colored there means that it's actually under private collective property. So that is what is named ejidos or comunidades. So that is, other people call it social property, right? And then what is not colored in the map is individual private property, like in the same way that individual property occurs in the United States. And so the graph to the left is just showing you how is that divided in different like smaller subdivisions, right? But the main takeaway here is that Mexico has almost no public land, right? There are different estimates calculate anything between 2 and 4%, and a lot of that 2 to 4% we actually don't know where it is, or in some cases is you have to count also the coastlines, which are federally owned. This is an extremely short history of land tenure in Mexico, so that you can get a little bit of an idea. So that's the arrow of time. And then in 1821, that's where we get our independence from Spain. Those two guys were the generals that made it, and they were hugging each other. They were pretty happy. And then the arrangement was that before the independence, most of the lands belonged to the church, right? And so, but after the independence, that actually doesn't change much. And what ends up happening is that the church and some post-colonial elites are controlling most of the land in Mexico, but there's also quite a bit of indigenous lands that were never really taken away as it happened in the United States. The colonization process in Mexico happened in a very different way. This is a whole different topic. I'm not going to go into it, but it's just relevant to sort of consider it. And then in 1856, there comes Benito Juarez, which is one of our most famous presidents historically, one of the strongest liberals historical liberals that we have, and also the first indigenous president in Mexico, and I believe in Latin America. And he was a really well-educated man, and paradoxically, he was convinced that the way that indigenous lands were held in Mexico and the tenure systems were actually not fitting and not productive with what was coming in terms of incipient capitalistic society and the globalized world. And so he tries to reform some of these of the way the land is held it takes away the land from church and from the religious institutions, and it takes it away also from some post-colonial elites. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is that it sort of just changes hands to new liberal elites, right? So the distribution of this land doesn't change much. And actually, because of the reforms that he was trying to do to try to make Mexico a more agriculturally productive country, fewer indigenous lands end up in the hands of indigenous groups. Then comes Porfirio Diaz, also of indigenous descent, also from Oaxaca, as Benito Juarez, but he decides that he wants to stay in his power for 30 years. Some good things happened under his earlier years, but then that was too much, and the Mexican Revolution explodes it's triggering in 1910 with figures and characters like Emiliano Zapata that you might know. Emiliano Zapata had the idea that to achieve prosperity and equality, you had to redistribute land and to give everyone a piece of land in the country. And that was his idea, which was confronted a little bit with previous Benito Juarez and what was happening in the rest of the world. So the agrarian reform, our constitution in 1917, which is the same constitution that we have right now, embeds that notion from Emiliano Zapata quite well. And during the next century, a huge land distribution process starts happening in Mexico with two big peaks, one occurring during the 1940s, late 1930s, and another one during the 1960s and 1970s. And this is a time where the figure of the ejido and the restitution, well, the figure of the ejido is born, and is a government created sort of like corporativist way of owning or using the land. That during this time, it's a social property, but it's actually not fully owned by the members of the ejido. And one of the problems is that this land is given to people in different places, no matter where they're from. That's different from indigenous owned community, indigenous lands that are restituted to indigenous people that have been in that particular place for many years. The case of ejidos are, in ejidos you have a demographic that is a bit different. Most, Mexicans were mestizos, and so you have that demographic with some indigenous people in these places too. And in 1992, there's another reform that tries to sort of reopen and try to change the way ejido lands are owned so that they can work or be more similar to individual private property, so that any ejidatario that wants to make its own parcels within the ejido can actually own the land, or that piece of land, and sell it if it wants to, or just transfer it to whoever this person wants. Just to note that, of course, most of these ejidatarios during this time are men, so land is not given to women. That has been changing a little bit recently, but not too much.
Hey, Paulo.
Yep.
Before you advance, there was a question about the map on the previous slide. What was the
Yes.
difference between the purple and green on that map? I think the subtitles.
Oh, sorry, the subtitles are probably not letting you see that. Thank you. Okay, so the purple is ejido, which I was just talking about. That's ejido land, right? So that's land that it was given post-revolution. So it was given to different groups, not necessarily because they belong to, or not that they belong, sorry, because they've been there for a long time. Green means that those are lands that were either never really taken away from indigenous communities, or that were restituted to them. And so most of these indigenous communities that you can see that were that kept their land or were given the land back are in Oaxaca and Chiapas and some of the southern states of Mexico, but also up here in Sonora, as you can see. Isla Tiburon, for example, is one of the main ones. Thanks for that. Okay, I'm gonna travel to the future again. So just zooming into this graph, President Lázaro Cárdenas is the guy, the person that is really keen on distributing land anywhere. And then again, President Luis Echeverría in the 70s. And this is in the 70s where Mexico starts experiencing some of the largest deforestation processes and waves that we've seen. It was really sort of cataclysmic, especially in the tropical moist forests down in Mexico. But this guy, Lázaro Cárdenas, he also actually was really interested in conservation and in forest management, thanks to this other person, Miguel Ángel de Quevedo, who was really interested in creating protected areas for Mexico. He was really aware of the importance of protecting natural resources, especially forests. And so for a time, they're really good friends and they get along well. And President Cárdenas is convinced that national parks are needed in Mexico. And so, well, this is just the surface. Sorry, again, because of the subtitles, you probably can't see it, but you would have the years over here all the way to the 2000s, started in the 1920s. And so this is the accumulated surface for protected areas in Mexico that started thanks to Miguel Ángel de Quevedo. Currently about 13% of the country is under some kind of federal protected area. And the joke that every time I read history about this process is that what was happening really was that Miguel Ángel de Quevedo was decreeing national parks, with one hand, but with the other hand, Lázaro Cárdenas was distributing the lands even inside these parks. And so the problem was that a lot of these parks that were being decreed, they were never paid to people. So if there was an expropriation process, in some other cases, they were just causing that people were living inside the polygons of some of these protected areas. And so you can imagine that this actually is very, very different. This is creating a very different institutional, social, political context than the one that we have in the United States in terms of what public lands are. An ejido, as I was saying, so this is a very similar map to the one that I showed, just different colors. So blue is ejido and the orange are indigenous communities. So what an ejido is formed of three main pieces. 1% typically is reserved for the village or the town where people live. And then 70% is, about 30% can go into the tierras parceladas, which is where productive agricultural activities take place. And these are the areas that after 1992, ejidatarios were allowed to parcelize, so make individual parcels out of these and make them their own. And then the lands of common use, or tierras de uso común, which is if you are an ejido that happens to be in a forest land, this is typically where some of the common forest would be, and it has to be managed consensually by the community. And as you can imagine, in some cases, some local institutions have emerged to do it correctly, but in most cases, it's actually a bit of a mess to try to manage these resources in a collective way. Any ejido is formed by three main figures of authority. So you have an assembly, a sheriff or a comisariado, and a surveillance committee, which is in charge of making sure that sort of policing the use of natural resources. And so this adds to the complexity that we might not have or not see in the United States as much, because when you're talking about a national park or a protected area, you may have a federal designation, and then you have also you're on state, like you can be the state of Sonora, and then you can be in a municipio, like in the municipality of Cananea, for example, and then you have an ejido with these different governance institutions. Okay, let me see if I can also get rid of this. There you go. So, sorry, I'm going to skip this just because in the interest of time. So just going back to our core programs, again, connecting people to the land, to the Sky Islands, conserving wildlife and protecting water. And we do this through multiple pathways, and especially under the umbrella of doing scientific work, especially engaging communities in science and research. But because of what I was explaining to you right now, doing these things in Mexico has to take a different tone necessarily, right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're doing this, and also keep in mind that during the past year, which is when I joined the organization, we also have had the COVID, and so that has also sort of changed how we're doing things right now. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to adjust as things start changing. So how are we doing some of the work that we're doing? Well, Sky Island Alliance, proudly, it's an organization that has achieved amazing things through the great voluntary capacity that it has in Arizona, and that's something that we have not had in the Mexican side. But that's just because things are different, as I was saying, socially and economically and politically. And so, what we started doing during the past year is that moving in Sonora from trying to have a volunteer base, like the same way that we have in the United States that has different demographics, to a more capacity building scheme where we are trying to build a lot of capacity around different partners, and that way we're getting some muscle on the ground. And we're doing this through our internship and our fellowship programs, and through these programs also creating student-based networks that are helping us tremendously with the work that we have to do with some of our core programs. And then the other thing is that we're not working so much in public lands because there are almost no public lands in Mexico, although there's a little bit of public land in the Bavispe Reserve. I'll talk about that. And so instead, we have to work a lot with private lands in Mexico. That means we have to work with ejidos or private ranchers. And so we have to build a lot of capacity building, a lot of local partnerships with NGOs and with landowners directly. And I'm just reminding you of that, everything that we're doing that to keep working on our core programs as wildlife conservation and water and connecting people. We're also supporting CONAMP, which is the Park Service of Mexico, right? So the Comisión Nacional de Áreas Naturales Protegidas, which is the federal agency that manages all the parks in Mexico. And we are supporting especially working with the Northwestern Regional Office, which is in charge of the Bavispe Reserve. And so we've been working closely with them on different matters. And then the subtitles there are not gonna let you see. And sorry, I forgot to explain the arrow to the right. And this is just telling you that these are different scales that we're trying to work from, like more on the ground, based on collaborating with local universities, for example, moving all the way to a big picture type of work doing transboundary conservation, where we'll building partnerships too, but with other NGOs and trying to bring together binational agencies, government agencies and organizations. I should have accounted for those subtitles. Apologize for that. So one of the things I want to start with is our partnership with Unisierra, Universidad de la Sierra, which is small university in the middle of the Sierra, in the Sky Islands, in the town of Montezuma. And the picture there, that's Luis, our executive director, a couple of years back, signing an agreement with the rector, the leadership of the university, which has been extremely productive and is one of the things that I've been enjoying the most, and I'll tell you why. Because of these agreements signed a couple of years back, we've been able to, last year we recruited our sort of first internship cohort, which was built from 3 of them. So Miguel to the left, and then Angel, and then Osvaldo and Elizabeth in the, so again in the middle. So there's Stephanie there that you can probably see the opportunity, and Aaron, they were from the Doris Duke Conservation Program. But Miguel, Angel, Osvaldo, and Elizabeth, they were from Unisierra, and they started the internship during last summer, doing different work in terms of professional development and conservation, acquiring conservation skills in research on the ground, but also with data management, and building partnerships and different things. And then that internship extended into the fall, and we, fortunately, thanks to some of the amazing donors that we have, we were able to provide stipends for these students, which makes a huge difference for them so that they can engage with the work that they needed to do. So they expanded to fall, and then in fall they were working in their different dissertations. So they were working in things related to water, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, water and wildlife conservation, camera trap operations. And they were able to do their different dissertations because in Mexico, when you're an undergraduate, you have to do a dissertation. And so I was serving as one of their mentors and their advisors as part of the university. And from this cohort, I want to really highlight 2 of. Let me just get rid of this again. From this cohort, Miguel and Angel joined us later as fellows, as part of our fellowship program, which is something that we didn't have in the past either. And so that means that as fellows that are working part-time with Sky Island Alliance, but they both live in Sonora, and they've been helping us a lot to take these core programs that I was talking about, right? Protecting water, conserving wildlife. These are programs or lines of work that have been translated into projects like Foto, Fauna, that you probably know, or Spring Seeker. And Angel and Miguel basically took the lead, which was especially important in a year like COVID. And they started expanding and strengthening these projects on the Sonoran side. Angel continues to work right now with springs. His passion is to work with water sources and management of the land around these water sources. And so what Angel basically did and continues to do right now is that he expanded the Spring Seeker program down into Sonora, and just by himself and with help of some friends and family, basically duplicated or triplicated the number of springs that we now have information for along some corridors in Sonora. What you see there is a map of all the springs that are mapped in the US Sky Islands and then in the Mexican Sky Islands that we knew of. The polygons there, that's the Bavispe Reserve. And so the ones that are in green, in light green, those are springs that have been mapped and surveyed through our Spring Seeker program. And this is a bit of an older map. We are ahead by a month and a half or so. I apologize for that. Angel is also helping us a lot by putting together a database that exists in different pieces and not very well organized in the INEGI, which is the National Institute of Geography and Statistics of Mexico. And so Angel and I have been working on putting together this database for the whole state of Sonora so that we can have an idea of where springs, but not just springs, like groundwaters, like wells and norias, which is like molinos in Mexico, and other groundwater sources exist in Mexico, well, in the state of Sonora. Some of these records date back to the 1980s, and they were not surveyed again ever. Some have more recent information. And so Angel has been cleaning this database, and we're going to start working on what kind of information we have. And then, of course, always considering safety of going to some of these sites, we're going to start expanding our Spring Seeker program to some of these springs and see whether they're still there and in what conditions we can find them. Miguel, on his side, he's been basically catching up, making the Foto Fauna in Sonora catching up with the Arizona counterpart. And so, thanks to Miguel, we've been getting a lot of records, right? Because he's operating cameras himself in different properties, ranches of people that he knows and he's been making partnerships with. But also, he's been leading new students from Unicera, like I'll talk about that now. But new cohorts of students, and Miguel has been assisting them in how to use these cameras and training them and how to submit the information. And by the way, Angel has been doing the same with Spring Seeker. So now, given the success that we've had and just how cool this experience has been, we now have a second binational internship program. Trinational, I should say, because we have members from some of the native tribes in the United States, like Adrian and Cassandra. So they're not from Sonora. And then a lady, she's in the US too. She's in Arizona right now, but she's from Florida and from Cuban origin. And then Monica, Fatima, Maybeth, and Gabriela, they all just recently joined the internship program from Unicera too. So this was part of a new recruitment. Again, thanks to the donors, thanks to the work that we've been doing, we're able to fund these programs, and we're able to provide stipends to these students. So they started already in June. They will be going through skill building workshops, through taking some webinars on some topics that are around conservation in the region, but also they will be preparing to do their dissertations in the next fall and getting advice from and support in the field from ourselves. Okay, so moving from the work that we've been doing with at the sort of like local scales and trying to, especially in a time of COVID, this has been helping us to get boots on the ground with some of these students. Now, let me talk about some of the conservation in private lands. As I was saying, this is a key component of the work that we have to do in Mexico because of the differences between the countries. And just for you to get an idea, this is a map. Everything that is in green, those are federal protected areas, right? So those are federally managed, but that doesn't mean that those are public lands again. So those are federal protected areas that are on someone's property, or at least most of them, around 80 or 85% of the land of protected areas is on someone's property, either ejidos or individual ranchers. But the little dots you see there in blues and reds, those are areas that are voluntarily destined to conservation. And that means that that is a designation that the federal government of Mexico has come up with and designed, so that all this private land that exists in Mexico can actually join these larger corridors and these areas of Mexico that are important for conservation without the necessity of being declared as federally protected. And I'll tell you why that's important. But before that, I want to just highlight that most of the work that we've been doing with private lands, sorry, that's my dog, and I'm going to have to just take a. Okay, apologize for that. I'm by myself, and it's a problem. Anyway, I really want to thank Antonio Esquer and Mario Siret from Fauna, because they have been instrumental in, especially during this past year, to help Sky Island Alliance to continue creating partnerships, maintaining them. They know the land like no one else does in Sonora. They know the Mexican Sky Islands like no one else. And so they've been opening up the doors for projects with ranchers and with private lands. In winter 2020, Mario and Antonio started leading a round of interviews with landowners that have shown already some interest that were open. You have to keep in mind that trust between government agencies, between, let's say, outside their organizations in these areas, in remote rural areas of Mexico. Trust is not a resource that abounds because of the different issues that historically have happened in the region, and so it's one of the most important assets that as conservationists we can build in a place like Sonora. And Mario and Antonio have been doing that really well, and so they were able to access 8 different ranchers, 8 different properties, and start talking to them about what is that, how is that they see conservation, and what are the things that they care about, and how could we best try to meet their interest as ranchers, but also as also for conservation. And so based on those interviews, based on that analysis, we were able to start a series of pilot projects. These are the 8 ranchers that the ones in color that you see, the green polygons, that's the Bavispe Wildlife Protection Reserve. And as you can see, all these ranchers are important because they lay around the Bavispe polygon, the northernmost polygon, and so they're really critical for connectivity of wildlife species towards north and south, towards moving to the US. And so 2 of these ranchers, Agua del Medio and Las Borregas, have active projects right now that we were able to fund thanks to donors like the New York Community Trust and the Wilberforce Foundation. And so one of them, Rancho Agua del Medio, based on the interviews that we were talking that we had with them, the idea or the best the next step was to help them to become UMA. And UMA is a unit of environmental management, and it's another type of designation by the federal government that allows landowners to they first have to propose what kind of natural resource they want to manage, and that can be either species of plant or species of animals, or and that they will manage to increase their populations and their conservation, but they can also make some aprovechamiento, as it's called in Spanish, so make some economic use of that resource. And so in this case, because a lot of the problems that they were having had to do with poaching and just the lack of proper management in the region, in the ranch, both with cattle and with preventing people from accessing for poaching. So they started developing, along with Mario and Antonio, being assisted by them, a management program for species such as deer and some vegetation species like some oaks, so that habitat can be improved in this region. And so what you're seeing here is a map that this ranch has never had, and it's already a map of the different features that it has and some of the polygons that are going to go into the UMA. And that sign there, that's the agreement. This ranch is part of an ejido, and so that's the agreement that is signed by the Asamblea Ejidal, allowing. So this is something that has been moving really fast, and that we have the finally it's about 85% complete. So which means that soon it will be submitted for approval of the Ministry of the Environment in Mexico. And once that happens, this ranch will be eligible to access some additional funds and programs of support that ranches typically don't have. And this will greatly increase, as I was saying, not just trust building and with the ranchers themselves, but also just the possibility of reducing wildlife and cattle conflict, for example, with ranchers. Oh, sorry, what is this? Okay, sorry, I want to skip that. I have some recording there. The second project, okay, hopefully this one do. Second project is in Rancho Las Borregas, which unfortunately, it's a beautiful place, but it's also a place that has been suffering from soil erosion, just because of the slopes, the really pronounced slopes that is found in, and the mismanagement of cattle in the region. And so Rancho Las Borregas, this is a different kind of project. In this case, we're working with soil restoration and revegetation projects that have already started, partially by installing some exclusion fences. Unfortunately, the family that owns Rancho Las Borregas was badly hit by COVID, and so we're just waiting a little bit so that we can restart the work in this area. So what are some of the goals of working in private lands like these ones? And we're working with 2 ranches of 8, but we really need to get to those 8 ranches, because the idea is that we can build and expand a network of conservation friendly ranches. This will be especially important because this network will propagate itself. Once other ranchers see the kind of work that we're doing, this will improve trust, improve relationships, not just between us or between Fauna and ranchers, but also with CONAM, for example, with agencies such as CONAM that have staff on the ground. And right now, as they are going through some financial crises or some budget crisis, it's really important that we can help CONAM to maintain their presence on the ground. And so that this is why working with these ranches is so important. Improving specific goals that we have with these ranchers are improving cattle management practices and therefore to reduce human wildlife conflict, and at the same time to promote and pursue the conservation designations that exist, and some of the ranchers don't know they exist, some of them, or don't have the technical or administrative capacity to pursue these designations, and so sort of like accompanying them in these processes can be really key. Another ranch is Rancho Los Fresnos, which is right at the border, just bordering the Huachuca Mountains, just to the south. This is a ranch that it has a different nature to the ones that I've been talking. This is owned by the Nature Conservancy, but managed by Naturalia, which is another Mexican NGO, one of the oldest ones, and working in the region. And in Rancho Los Fresnos, which is such a critical habitat for birds and aquatic species, just because of the riparian habitats that it has. Some of the key things that we're doing is, like, first of all, block 16 of our border wildlife study is found on the other side of the border in Rancho Los Fresnos. And so thanks to Naturalia, we've been able to do monthly checks of the cameras. We have to trade the memories and keep meeting at the border so that we can get that information from them, because there's so many images that of course we can't do that through the internet. And right now, as we speak, Naturalia staff is doing the same field and the vegetation and habitat service that we did for our blocks, for our border wildlife study. So they're collecting a bunch of data on the type of vegetation that is found, canopy cover, different habitat features around each camera, so that we can actually have good covariates and a solid research framework around our border wildlife study. At the same time, well, this actually is concluded already. During the last year, we worked with Naturalia to do a lot of riparian restoration, basically excluding cattle from critical habitats like cienegas and some streams, and then doing replanting of vegetation in about 60 hectares. These are some of the images that of the species. So basically around I think almost 4,000 plants, including walnut and willows and ash and cottonwoods, were replanted in regions, in areas that they were completely gone, or that they were not regenerating by themselves because of cattle. So now let's keep moving in scale a little bit, so the bigger scales. And I've been talking about the Bavispe Reserve here, which is again depicted there in the blue polygon. And then the Sky Islands, the Mexican Sky Islands in green. The Bavispe Reserve is the only federal protected area that exists in Mexico, in Sonora, in the Mexican Sky Islands. So that, and as I show you, it's surrounded by different ranches and other types of sorry, just need a second. Sorry about that. Animals, they don't know reason. So it's surrounded by these ranches, but it's the only area that is federally managed. And the problem is that, as you can see, it's also separated into different polygons. So connectivity in this area is key. And Bavispe is actually considered, and has been considered by experts in connectivity, as one of the stepping stones for what is called the Western Wildway, along the entire Western United States and even all the way north to Canada from northern Mexico. To connect species that travel south and north in these corridors. Now, The problem with Avispe is that it was recategorized in 2017, I believe, from being just a strange category that didn't actually exist to Área de Protección de Flora y Fauna. So that's a wildlife protection area, which is a category that is not necessarily the most strict that we have in Mexico. But the problem is that just because of the timing, because it's something that has been recent, it doesn't have a management program. And every protected area in Mexico, it's supposed to have a management program. It just takes some time. And what I'm showing you here is actually the photo of the management program of the Janos Biosphere Reserve, which is just east of Avispe in Chihuahua. This is where the bison and wolves, Mexican wolves, have been reintroduced. And then what you see to the right, that's a map of the, and sorry again, with the subtitles, you probably can't see that, but that's the zoning, right? That's the land use zoning within this reserve. And I'm showing you this map because this is, I mean, there are many reasons why the management program is important, because it's basically the document that determines and regulates what can be done and what can, and how it can be done in any particular area. But so if the zoning is perhaps one of the most interesting or the important processes that has to happen, because it's, first of all, it's a really intricate social and political process because of all the land ownership that I was explaining to you earlier. There are different interests, there are different people living in the area. And when you do some zoning, that means that some people are being restricted from doing some things and other people from doing other things, right? So it is quite a process to try to get these management programs in place, but without them, some of these areas can basically run the risk of becoming paper parks. And for something like Bavispe, that's critical because there are different pressures, including climate change, including unsustainable cattle ranching in many cases, but also mining, that is really important that can go under regulation. There are a lot of mining concessions in the Sky Island regions, and this is why it's so important that we can support CONAMP with the management program. And therefore, that is something that we've been doing in the past year. This is, and I have to thank the Southwest Border Resource Protection Program from the National Park Service for supporting us, or rather supporting CONAMP with this project. We have now formed a core group of people that are working together. We have a calendar, we have a timeline. We're planning to have the last draft or the final draft of this management program towards the end of 2022. But before that, at the end of this year, we'll actually have a draft that will go into revision by all the different stakeholders, starting by the local communities. So that's what you're seeing there. So that this last purple part, after the revision by the expert group. So we have different committees that are expert in different things like wildlife and water and social issues. We're coordinating them all so that we can come out with a proposal for the plan, for the program, but also for land use zoning. And then the second year in 2022, we also have received support already from the Southwest Border Resource Protection Program. And we'll be conducting all the field work around the program, which means basically visiting all the different communities and sharing the information with them, taking into account their feedback. And then finally, at the end of 2022, we'll have a full proposal that then goes into the Mexican Congress and different agencies of the Mexican government to get approved. And that will be out of our hands. But just the fact that we were able to support these 2 years is a huge difference right now. Keeping expanding into sort of like larger scale. A few months back, we started toying with the idea of, and this is mostly because of the tragedy of the border wall in the past 4 years, and then how it was splitting the countries and harming wildlife and water resources in the region. We wanted to try to do something that on a completely opposite direction. So thanks to Ben Wilder, for example, at the Arizona Institute of Resilience in the University of Arizona, also to CONAMP, Ana Luisa Figueroa, the regional director of CONAMP, Krista Model at the Park Service, Amanda Gonzalez at the Fish and Wildlife Service. We started getting, and we also have people from ProNatura, like Sula Vanderplat, we started getting together to try to come up with ideas that we could do some long-term systematic transboundary conservation efforts. And so far we've been meeting regularly about every 2 months, and we have come up with the idea of doing something called the research clusters for parks, for transboundary parks, which is basically bringing together researchers and academia and NGOs, research from NGOs, funding entities, and parks, and seat them at the same table and get a long-term plan of what are the research needs of these parks, not just by themselves, but also from a transboundary perspective, from a connectivity perspective. And I'm happy to also say that we're working in the Sky Island regions, but we're working beyond that. That's why we also have people helping us to work in Baja California, where there are other Sky Islands, and the state of California, and also across Sonora. We might try to expand into the Chihuahuan region, so that different parks that are around the border can actually work together. And in that same tone, we thought that sort of redesigning and relaunching a Borderlands version of the Sister Parks program was a good idea too. And so to accomplish this, why is this not moving? So in the next months around this initiative, we'll be hosting in September, hopefully parks managers but researchers workshop, where they will be sitting at the same table and talking about shared priorities from parks that are at the border, funding sources, and how to make these funding sources more systematic and more available, and having long-term commitments. So, for example, making some of these parks long-term ecological research sites for some of the universities that can be either in Arizona or in California or in Mexico, of course, too, including Universidad de Sonora, Unisierra, also UNAM in Mexico City. And then in October 2021, we will be sitting together also in a workshop to try to redesign the Sister Spark program, talking about a strategic pairing. So not just pairings randomly, you're right, like it used to be, but rather strategic pairings that happen across the border. And also strategic topics, like what are the things that some of these parks need to tackle together in terms of management. So what comes next? Needless to say, this has been an interesting and weird year. And so, as you can see, most of the work that we're doing right now, we're doing them thanks to partners and partnerships that we are building and that we will continue to build, and we will continue to work in this manner, just because it is really effective, and also because it helps to build capacity on the Mexican side. But also in a post-COVID world, we'll go back out and get our own boots on the ground in Sonora. So we're looking forward to that, and we'll be joining forces with the partners that we've been working there. I'm really excited, especially because after solving the visa issues that COVID also presented, I'll be joining Miguel and Angel, and we'll be working together at a time in the Sonoran side. We will continue to strengthen our current programs, things like Foto, Fauna, and Spring Seeker, and Transboundary initiatives, and supporting economy. We will continue to find financial support to continue with those, of course. And we want to add some new stuff, of course. There's with ProFauna and with CONAMP and with the Wildlife Conservation Society, for example, we've been talking about the importance of helping Sonora with a livestock predation compensation program for ranchers, right? So that we can, this is another thing that will be really key in gaining their trust. There is one in place right now led by the Confederación Ganadera, the Confederation of Cattle Ranching, but it's not, even though they've been doing great work, it's not very efficient. They lack resources, they lack technical capacities. And so we want to support these kind of things. We think this can make a huge difference for ranchers and for reducing wildlife human conflict. So that's something that we want to aim for during this year. And I really want to thank, I've been talking about them, I've been mentioning them, but some of the funders that have made this work possible, like the National Park Service, the Wilberforce Foundation, the New York Community Trust, and also, you know, the partners that have made this work possible, like Fauna, Pronatura, Naturalia, Unisierra, and CONAMP, of course. Now, I'm not gonna, so before I say thank you and take your questions, I want to pass it to Anna, because we have another big part of the work that we'll be doing, which has to do with communications, that has been growing a lot. And so Anna will tell you a little bit about that. And then we'll go back to any questions or comments that you might have about what I've been talking about, or the communications part. So Anna, if you're around, all yours. And again, I apologize for my pet problems.
Thank you, Paulo. If you stop sharing your screen,
Yes, of course.
Slide quick.
Sorry.
And
there you go.
Thank you. Oops, let me add a spotlight. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen and talk really quickly about the work we've been doing with communications. So let me pull that up. And while I talk about this, if you have questions for Paulo, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them after my slide, which is going to be pretty short. Yeah, so I would just like to bring up, I'm the communications manager here at Sky Island Alliance. I started back in October 2020, so I'm fairly newish still. But with the work that we've been doing in Sonora and the importance of doing our work in the Sky Islands on both the US side and the Mexico side, one of my biggest goals for the year 2021 is to start really working on our communications in Spanish to make sure that we're telling our story and educating audiences in both the US and Mexico. And we really want to make our content and all the things we're doing, our program work, we want to make that accessible for everybody who speaks English and Spanish. So currently I am working on an overhaul of our website to make sure that by the end of the year, our content is available in both languages. But I also just wanted to point you to a couple places today where you can follow along with our journey and the work that volunteers and partners are doing in Spanish if you speak Spanish. The first one is just, we have blogs and articles on our work at skylandalliance.org/tag/Espanol. I can drop that link in the chat box in a minute here. So we will be adding more blogs in Spanish as we go along, and those are easy to share with people who maybe speak Spanish. I put a link in the chat to our Spanish Foto Fauna page, which if you'd like to get involved, we would love to have people included in Mexico and in the US. So that's a really great resource. We do have, thanks to Angel and Miguel, who are our two fellows for 2021. They were interns and now they are working with us through the year. They have been helping me launch an Instagram account and a Twitter account. You can see the names here and I'll pop a link in the chat too. But those are great resources if you'd like to follow along with the work we're doing in Sonora in Spanish. And then also they've been doing some great work with Wildlife Wednesdays and writing about the different species that we have on the Mexican side of the border. So those are fun too. And then we do often have coffee breaks in Spanish or have Spanish subtitles on those. And so you can go to YouTube and you can see all of our coffee breaks there. But this is something that I'm going to be working on moving forward throughout the year to hopefully start providing more content in Spanish and also building up our Mexican program pages so that we can tell the story accurately for both sides of the region. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you for listening. So I'm going to stop sharing and check in on our questions.
Thanks, Anna.
You are welcome. So Paulo, there is a question from Mike, and this relates back to the ranchers who are getting conservation designations. And he says, I didn't quite understand what the benefits are to ranchers for getting the conservation designations. Is it funding from the federal government? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That's a great question, Mike. So yeah, so indeed, so that's one thing. So they are, let's say, more eligible for specific programs because if they have those designations, that means that they have worked through some things, like they have a management program, for example, let's say for white-tailed deer, right? In the case of Auma, or they might have it for just a comprehensive conservation program, right? And so they will have access to these funds that were not access to them previously. At the same time, they might be eligible also for non-government related things by different nonprofits, right? Because if let's say that you're an ADVC, and this is just a hypothetical thing, but if you're an ADVC that has been working towards conservation, but also tourism, right? And then so different organizations that have additional capacity building skills might be investing in your ranch or in your property because there's that designation in place. But then there's a different kind of benefit, which is more intrinsic to, and it doesn't seem tangible, but it actually is one of the main reasons why a lot of the ranchers pursue these designations or the ejidos, has to do because having a management program itself, and just by definition improves some of their practices, right, and just increases some of it just provides additional benefits. This is mostly the case. Well, this is the case. It's certainly for ranchers, for when the main activities have to do with cattle ranching. Also with forestry things. Like once you get certified as a ejido forestal, for example, like a forestry company, and you have a management plan, and that means that you went through a process of technical advising, and that itself will provide some benefits. I hope that helps you clarify the question.
Thanks, Paulo. There's another question from Ian. Are there any conservation trips for volunteers scheduled in the likely future from Tucson to the Mexican Sky Islands? Or have we done that in the past? Maybe we'll do that again in the future at some point.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have. I know we have done that in the past before my time. I got here in the middle of COVID, so that was not the case when I arrived here. But I know we've done that in the past, and I also know that we are going to do it again. I think at this point it's just a matter of keeping track of. Mexico, of course, has been way behind vaccination schemes than in the United States. And that makes, especially in more isolated areas, it's been more difficult. But I know that it's making some progress, and I think it will be a matter of talking to our partners soon and getting a sense of how things are, and how people over there feel about receiving visits again. But we will start doing this as an organization very soon. I think late July or August. We'll start finally crossing the border again and just doing that. So I would be hopeful that by the end of this year, we might be able to start organizing some trips.
Thanks. I also have kind of a break-off question from that myself. So for people who would like to support work on the Mexican side of the border in Sonora, how can they get involved? Whether that's if they're in Mexico or whether they're from the US.
One thing would be, as I was saying, like once we have a better idea, and we will promote this in our website. Once we have an idea of when can we cross again, and how things have been changing, because the other thing that we have to keep in mind about Sonora is just safety and some of these things. And so that will be for sure a way of contributing, is by joining some of the whenever we have some of these trips. We'll be, I envision that we'll be working again in Los Fresnos and doing some of the restoration work ourselves, and the same in some of these ranchers, right? I would encourage you very much to also follow the new Spanish social media that Ana has been talking about, and just promoting it. I would also, if you know of people that want to be donors, encourage the donations that are going, because a lot of the work that we've been doing, especially in this really tough year, has been thanks to those donations. But yeah, I think very soon we'll be able to put together crews again to work in specific topics. So like we'll be, the crews that will be dealing with water issues, right? There's a lot of need to do soil restoration, for example, and revegetation projects. And so we'll be having announcements on that to go to do it in Sonora. There's also, when we talk about Sonora, you also want to make sure that if we bring people, and we want to bring volunteers, which of course helps, and I think people will appreciate it a lot, but you also want to leave some of the work that can be hired in the region as local workers, right? Because you want to leave that benefit there. That is something that is, just something that is important to be aware of constantly, of how things are different in that sense. But yeah, anything around our wildlife and water programs will probably be restarting some operations on the ground that will be open for anyone soon.
Cool, thank you. I have one last question that I'm seeing here in Zoom from Jose. Can you expand on the role of fire within the Bavispe management plan?
Yeah, so, and thanks for that reminder. There's a lot of more stuff about the Bavispe management plan that, there's a lot more content around that. But I just wanted to think that because, as you can imagine, because of all the different interests around the different stakeholders around an area like this, there's ranching, there are water resources, there's mining. This is a kind of work that we've been keeping, that and as a request from CONAM, we try to keep more like discreet. And we know a lot of maps, a lot of things that have been going on. We're not sharing them for this purpose, so that we can, do everything at the time. But so anyway, that was just as a parenthesis. So fire, in the same way that in the Arizona side, it's a big portion of the ecological regimes in the region of the Sky Islands. So any management program will have different subcomponents, right? Different subdivisions. There will be something about restoration. There will be something about wildlife conservation. There will be something about priority species. There will be something about protection and vigilancia, like surveillance, and who is in charge of that and how's that going to be coordinated at different levels. And there's, in the same way, there's always something about fire, unless you are in a region where fire is not important, which I can't think right now where. But so to do that, we held workshops with experts that have expertise in fire management, and so everything that is relevant to the region and all the data that exists for the region, it's laid down in that management plan. And so everything that has to do with fire management then will be determined by what is in the management program. And so the coordination with CONAFOR, for example, or with the local crews, with the HIDOs to go and build whatever, any infrastructure that needs to be created for fire management will be based on this chapter on fire. I don't know the name of the experts that participated at the top of my head in that panel, but if you're interested more in that, I'm really happy to connect you with the people that have been working that subcomponent specifically.
Awesome. Thank you, Paulo. We're a little bit over time, and I'm not seeing any other questions. So we will wrap up now. This recording will be available on the website later today. I believe I popped a link in the chat, and then I also just dropped a link in the chat to our upcoming calendar items. So if you're interested in volunteering with us in Mexico or in the US, that's where you'll be able to find those upcoming events. And then also that's where you can find our next coffee breaks. So, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Paulo, for your wonderful presentation. It was so great to learn from you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for staying with me. I hope you have a good rest of the week. Thanks, Anna.
Yes, thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Ciao.